What's up guys, I'm BTC. Today I want to talk to you about a project that I've been thinking about for a long time. This is definitely one of those videos that I hope the Overwatch devs get to see, so I would greatly appreciate it if you like and share the video. Side note, some of the gameplay you see will show Mei with only 158 health, but that is not her effective health. Don't worry, I'll explain all that a little bit later. Starting out, I want you to think about what a tank is in Overwatch and what their responsibilities are. If I told you Blizzard was adding a new character to the game that had the ability to protect teammates from a significant amount of damage, had very high survivability, great zoning and area control, and above average health, I think it's a pretty safe bet that the vast majority of players would assume that new character would be a tank. Let's take a quick look at some of the existing tank abilities compared to what Mei has. The first thing is being able to protect your teammates. This is the foundation of a tank character. In Overwatch, there are different methods for doing this, whether it's a barrier, defense matrix, a bubble, or something else. For Mei, she has the ice wall, which is able to stop all kinds of damage, unlike barriers and the defense matrix, which can only block certain types each. Another major responsibility is area control and zoning. This is when a tank controls a section of the map. This allows your team the freedom of movement to do their job, while also pressuring the enemy team into a disadvantageous position. Most of the tank ultimates will perform this function. Mei has 3 abilities that can do this. The previously mentioned Ice Wall can block off areas and separate enemy players. Blizzard is one of the best area control abilities in the entire game, and even her primary attack, with its slow and freeze, allows Mei to control the immediate area around her. Major attributes for a tank are to have high health and sustainability. This includes armor and abilities like Fortify, Take a Breather, and Adaptive Shield, which provide the durability that a tank character needs. Mei has the Cryo Freeze, which is one of the best survivability tools in the entire game. Grants her complete immunity to all damage while also healing her. It can also help block damage to her teammates if they're standing behind it. Another function that many tanks have is some form of crowd control. This goes hand in hand with the previously mentioned area control and zoning. Whether it's an ultimate or a normal ability, these things cause the enemy team to be more careful and to give up ground in order to not be caught by them. For Mei, as I already covered, both her ultimate Blizzard and her primary attack perform these functions very well. Recently, there have been a lot of nerfs to Mei. This is because right after the role queue system was introduced, Mei became incredibly powerful, and understanding that situation is key. Let's take a look. For the first several years of Overwatch, Mei was an incredibly situational and one of the least used heroes in the entire game. This is because even though Mei has a lot of attributes that coincide with being a tank, she isn't fully a tank hero in her current form. Prior to the role queue system, if you needed another tank, then you just picked that extra tank. That's why we ended up with things like Goats Comp. However, when Role Queue was introduced, teams were restricted to only 2 tanks. Well, as it turns out, while Mei isn't fully a tank, she does a pretty good job with some of that functionality. Let's say she's about 50% of a normal tank. That means in a 2-2-2 Role Queue system, most teams were restricted to only 2 tanks, but if you ran Mei, you effectively had 2.5 tanks. This granted your team a significant amount of extra protection and area control. As a result, Mei's pick rate skyrocketed. She went from being one of the least used situational characters to one of the strongest and most popular heroes almost overnight. And as you would guess, this caused a lot of problems. Blizzard decided to nerf Mei again and again and again. They nerfed her attack and ammo, her ice wall, her slow and freeze effects, and just recently her ultimate. Once more, she is extremely situational because of all these nerfs, and her pick rate has dropped to one of the lowest in the game. And there are some that would be happy to see this or believe that situational characters are okay, but I think that's just foolish, and over the last couple years, Blizzard has been moving away from that sort of thing. A character doesn't need to be good all the time in every match, but no hero should be only useful in 1 out of 100 matches. Given how long it takes Blizzard to make a character, for that hero to be rarely used is just a waste of time and effort. Therefore, I propose that the hero be rebalanced and moved into the tank category. I've created a tank version of Mei using the workshop and did quite a bit of testing with it. While some changes will likely still need to be made, I believe that the concept is sound. If anyone from Blizzard is watching this, I think it would be quite easy to take these changes and apply them to an experimental mode in Overwatch, since I can do the vast majority of the changes in a normal custom game. I definitely believe that this is something worth trying, because the alternative of Mei being pushed into that extremely situational status again, along with the other lingering problems, is not very good. The way I see it, there are several important goals for this rework. First, I want to keep this change as simple as possible. I believe that this can be done because her abilities don't require any significant changes. As previously mentioned, they already function much like what you would have on a tank character. This will cut away all of the time that would have been needed to create new animations and artwork. Second, her abilities, namely the Ice Wall, need to be effective at both zoning and protecting your team, but not frustrating for the enemy players. We just went through some pretty significant barrier nerfs because people didn't want to spend a whole lot of time attacking them. This sort of thing would be even worse for frequently used high health Ice Walls, so some changes to that will be necessary. And third, the issue of Mei's hitbox needs to be addressed. Most tanks have fairly large hitboxes, and while Mei's isn't that much smaller than Zarya, it's still on the small side, so it would need to be looked at. This can be fixed by either adding a larger backpack type device onto Mei, which would increase the overall size of her hitbox without changing the size of Mei herself, but the issue with that is it would likely cause a significant amount of extra work. Every single one of Mei's character skins would need to be changed, and that's a lot of time and effort. So I think the better solution is to simply not give her as much health as the other characters in order to compensate for the smaller hitbox. And from my testing, it certainly seems to work out. Alright, so let's take a look at the changes that I've made. The general idea is to decrease the DPS aspect of the character while increasing the tank aspect. Let me start by explaining that 158 health thing you've been seeing in the gameplay. It's 158 because of an issue with how the Ice Wall works. The health of the Ice Wall is directly connected to Mei's max health. I wanted to increase her health while decreasing the total health on the Ice Wall. Because these two things work against each other, I had to find a creative workaround. So what I did was I dropped Mei's health to the appropriate amount, and I had to round up to 63%, and then I added damage resistance to the character. This allows for the Ice Wall to have lower health, but Mei will have a much higher true effective health. In this case, it's 350. I'll show you in a quick demonstration. Reinhardt's Fire Strike does 100 damage normally, but in this case it's equal to 45, so hitting Mei with 3 of them, that's 300 damage, and then left over you have 23, which is half of 45, but it's rounded up, because that's the way the game works. So 350. And if you're wondering about how the healing works, it's the exact same, just in reverse. So the healing and the damage have been scaled appropriately for Mei to have 350 health. And with that, let's go to the stats. On the left-hand side, you're going to see what Mei has in her current form as a DPS, and on the right-hand side will be the rework of Mei as a tank. As I mentioned before, her health has been increased to 350. While this is lower than the other tank characters, you need to keep in mind that Mei has a smaller hitbox. On top of that, she also has the Ice Wall and the Ice Block, which are both incredibly powerful defensive tools. In my testing, 350 seems to be a very nice spot. Any more would just be too strong, and any less doesn't really give her enough survivability to function as a tank. As a trade-off for getting more tank stuff, Mei needs to lose some of the DPS stuff, most notably her damage. I decreased the primary attack from 55 damage per second down to 50, and her secondary attack has also been lowered from 75 down to 65. All other aspects of both of these attacks remain the same: the projectile speed, ammo cost, etc. Mei's first ability is the Cryo Freeze or Ice Block. I increased the raw healing amount up to 200, however the percentage amount is roughly the same. Instead of 150 out of 250, it's now 200 out of 350. There's also a trade-off with the duration. I decreased the max duration of the Ice Block to 3 seconds, which means that it's less effective for long duration attacks and requires the player to be more precise when using it, but the trade-off is that it will heal faster during that time. And the main reason for this is 4.25 seconds, which is the current total duration, is just too long of a time to remove any tank from the fight. I also lowered the cooldown on the Ice Block by 1 second. This is to bring it more in line with the other tank defensive abilities like Orissa's Fortify, Roadhog's Take a Breather, and Zarya's Personal Bubble. The next ability is the Ice Wall, and this is tricky to balance. For a tank hero, it needs to be used more frequently than you would need to use it as a DPS hero. However, other changes would also need to be made so that dealing with an enemy Ice Wall is not excessively frustrating. This would kind of be like bringing back the old barrier situation, but even worse. As a result, I made a bunch of changes. First, the health of each ice pillar has been reduced from 400 down to 250. This means that they're still pretty decent at protection, but they can be broken through focused attacks. And because each ice pillar breaks separately, the remaining pillars will still provide some protection. This means that the enemy team can invest a small amount of time to break through to rescue a trapped teammate, or to push through and continue the attack. The duration of the ice wall has been reduced from 5 seconds to 4. This again goes along with that frustration factor that I'm trying to minimize for the enemy team. I want the ice wall to be effective to protect your team and to block off an area, but I don't want it to stick around forever. And finally, for the Ice Wall, to make it more useful as a tank ability, I needed to lower the cooldown back to where it was before, reducing it from 13 seconds down to 10. It wasn't that long ago Blizzard made this nerf to the Ice Wall. In fact, it was just back in March. They changed it from 10 up to 13 because for a DPS hero, it was just too strong. However, moving Mei to a tank means that she needs to use it more frequently, and that's the trade-off. The wall's a little weaker and less frustrating for the enemy players, but Mei can use it more often when she needs it in order to control an area or to protect her team. However, in the course of making the ice wall less frustrating to deal with, I don't think that Mei has quite enough damage prevention functionality for her teammates. So, in order to compensate for this, I created a passive called Chilled. Enemies that are damaged by Mei will receive a debuff that lasts for 4 seconds and reduces their damage by 12%. This allows Mei to effectively function as a tank and reduce the damage her team takes while almost completely eliminating the frustration factor that would have been associated with having a barrier in the way. At first, it may not seem like it's much, and maybe not for each individual attack, but over the course of the fight, the damage reduced definitely adds up. And since Mei can hit multiple enemies with her primary attack, 12% seems to be a good number without being too strong. I should also point out that having this extra effect on Mei's attack means that Blizzard would likely be able to weaken the overall effect of the crowd control aspect of Mei's primary attack. So it would still be effective as a tanking tool, but it would be less frustrating for the enemy players when it comes to the crowd control of the slow and the freeze. And lastly is Mei's ultimate, Blizzard, which would be unchanged from the DPS version. It already does exactly what I think it should do on a tank character, so there really isn't much reason to change anything. Alright, so what effects do all of these changes have on the game? The first is that Mei would no longer be a situational character. The new build is very effective in both Brawl and Bunker-style team comp. It's also very good at dealing with choke points on both defense and attack. I think it might actually be a little bit better on the attack side of things, as weird as that sounds. Moving Mei into the tank role also solves the 2.5 tank problem that I mentioned earlier. You can't have that extra partial tank. You can't have Mei along with double barrier if she's been moved into the tank role. So that entire problem is just completely wiped away. It also adds a new character into the tank role, which, let's be honest, needs more heroes. And since Mei has been nerfed to the point where she's at the bottom of the pick rate for the DPS category, why not move her into the tank role where she will get some playtime and actually be more useful? Couple other things. If you noticed, these changes that I've gone through don't require all that much effort to make. I managed to do almost all of it in a custom match for the workshop in a single day. Granted, I had to do some creative workarounds, but Blizzard wouldn't have to do that. They could just change the health of the ice wall. They don't have to have all that creative workaround stuff. Someone on the Overwatch dev team could probably throw this together in a weekend and put it on the experimental mode. And yes, there's a good chance that the numbers I used aren't perfect and would likely need some adjustments, but from my testing, I believe that this idea can definitely work, and I think that it is worth the time and effort from the Overwatch dev team to at least throw this into an experimental mode and test it out. And if you agree, then I would appreciate it if you like and share the video in order to help it get some traction. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to see more, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell to get notified. You can get some cool gear, join my Discord server, or follow me on social media with the links down in the description below. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters, and remember, always blame the controller because it's never your fault.